Okay. So now we've covered chapter 1 of the book of Nehemiah. And now remember, there was a lot of emphasis that are placed on prayer, lots of emphasis on prayer. Now, we cannot have, like you rightly said now, we cannot have a prayer life that is empty, or a prayer life that don't believe that God is going to answer us. If that is going to be the attitude of the leader, then it's going to be very difficult for that individual to be a successful leader when he does not believe that God can intervene and God can answer prayers. Now, I want you to turn your Bibles now to chapter 2. So now we're going to go to chapter 2 of the book of Nehemiah. Right? I want us to look at verses 1 to verse 8. And this is going to speak about prayer leads to action. Prayer leads to action. So follow with me. In verse 1 of chapter 2, and it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, why is your face sad, since when you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid, and said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad, when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire? Then the king said to me, what do you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild. The king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, how long will your journey be, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Furthermore, I say to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And the letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel, that pertains to the temple for the city wall, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. Now that to me, brethren, that to me is very interesting. Now, firstly, okay, we are talking about prayer leads to action. That's the first thing that we are talking about. Prayer leads to action. Now, what we see here is that Nehemiah must have been a very pleasant person. He must have been a very pleasant person. And so when the king saw his facial expression, and the king saw that something had changed, and he was not looking the same person that he was, the king asked a question. Now, as a leader, we talk about our character being important. We talk about our attitude that needs to be important. We talk about our faith that needs to be important. But what about how we carry ourselves? If those who you are leading, they observe you as a person that is always looking depressing, or they observe you as a person that is always looking unpleasant, or they observe you as a person that just, you know, just you are a word that we use, you stay miserable. There's no joy about yourself. What is it going to do to the people that we lead? There's going to be no joy in them. There's going to be unpleasantness. There's going to be no happiness. They're going to be an unhappy group of people. They don't want to be in your company. They don't want to do this. So, Nehemiah being a cupbearer, it was important as to how he had to carry himself. And so when the king observed him and the king saw that there was something different, Nehemiah didn't have to say anything. The king asked him what the problem was, and he responded. The king granted him permission, and the king allowed him to go. And the only thing that he asked the king is, will you give me a letter so that I can go through a territory maybe that is danger, where it's not safe for me to go through, excuse me, that I will be allowed. Also give me a letter that will grant, that I will get the timber that is necessary to start the rebuilding and start doing what needs to be done. There was no hesitation from the king. So when a leader then is a person who is God-fearing, when a leader is prayerful, and when a leader is leading the flock accordingly, you will have the support of the people. That's good leadership. You lead by example. Here in Nehemiah's case, he was the cupbearer. And the king observed him, and the king granted him everything that he had requested. He didn't have to beg of the king. And the same way with the people that we lead, we should not be begging of the people. Last week, I said to those that were in class, we need to be down in the trenches with the people. We need to get our hands dirty. We need to lead by example. And again, here is something so learn from Nehemiah as to how he carried himself when the request was made to the king, it was granted. How we lead the people when we ask the people's commitment, when we ask the people to be involved, when we ask the people to come to a special meeting, when we ask the people to go the second mile, there's a willingness because we are leading by example. What did Nehemiah do? He was a cupbearer, but he was a cupbearer by example. And so pray, brethren, pray. He asked God. God granted. And so pray is it gives a reaction and it leads to action. In other words, you do not wait. A leader is a self-starter. You do not wait for someone else. Nehemiah didn't hear what was brought to his attention and now say, just hold on, I need to get this person involved, I need to get that person involved, and I let them, they need to go and inspect, they need to do this, they need to go, they do that. Nehemiah took the leadership role. He led by example. Okay? So verses 1 to verse 8 is a very important because prayer will lead to action. And our prayer life should also be of such a nature that it leads to us being in action. Okay? Anything that you're not sure about, anything you'd like to ask, anything you'd like to add, please feel free to do that now. No hands up?
Hand at the back.
Okay, I can. Excuse me, I can see your hand.
I heard someone once say, like a good elder must smell like sheep.
You cut out.
A good elder must smell like sheep.
There's actually a book that has been written, An Elder Smelling Like Sheep. And it's a very good article to read. And so that is very true in what you are saying, extremely true in what you are saying. Okay? And we cannot doubt that at all. So we see that Nehemiah was sad. We see that the city was down, it was in ruins, it was destroyed by fire. And then we see Nehemiah ask the king, and in verse 4, we notice again that Nehemiah prayed. And if you notice in verse 4 of chapter 2, then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed firstly to the God of heaven. You see that again? What was the first thing he did? He prayed. What's the first thing that leaders must do? They pray. You see? Very important. Okay? Now look at verses 8 to verse 20. And this is going to be the last section that we are going to do. And we'll continue tomorrow evening. All right? Now, look for God's hand in everything as a leader. Don't look at others' hands. Don't look at what others are going to be doing. Don't look at what you need to do. Look for God's hand in everything. And this is what Nehemiah did. He looked at God's hand. Now notice in verse 8. Okay, the light is very bad for me. I cannot really see. So is somebody going to offer to read for me from verses 8 to verse 20?
And the letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, so that he might give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace that pertains to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. I then came to the governors beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me captains of the army and horsemen. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard about it, it grieved them exceedingly that there had come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I rose in the night, and I and some men with me. I did not tell anyone what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. Neither was there any animal with me, except the animal upon which I rode. Then I went out by night by the valley gate, even before the serpent well, to the refuse gate. And I viewed the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gates that were burned by fire. Then I went to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the animal that was under me to pass. Then went I up in the night by the valley and viewed the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. Now the rulers did not know where I had gone or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest who did the work. Then I said to them, "You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, so that we no longer be a reproach." Then I told them of the hand of my God was upon me, and as well the king's words that he had spoken to me. And they said, "Let us rise up and build." So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they mocked us to scorn and despised us, and they said, "What is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king?" Then I answered them and said to them, "The God of heaven, he will prosper us. Therefore we his servants will arise and build. But you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem."
Thank you, my brother. Appreciate it. Okay. Now notice what happens, right? He prays, he speaks to the king. The king grants him permission. So now he sets off now to go and do what he's prayed for, and what has been brought to his attention, he's now willing to go and do the work. Now look at your notes. Look at your notes. Look for God's hand, and you will notice chapter 2, verses 8 to 20. Now, this is going to bring us to the final point of these 2 chapters. Look for God's hand. The king grants what Nehemiah requests. because the good hand of God was on him. Now notice this now. Why did the king grant him permission to go? He was the cupbearer. When the plate of food was brought to him, he needed to be the first person to taste it before the king is served. When anything was given to the king to drink, Nehemiah was the first person to taste of it to make sure it's not poison, there's no danger in it, there's nothing like that. So before it's given to the king, Nehemiah. So if there's anything wrong with the drink, anything wrong with the food, who will be affected by it? It will be Nehemiah. Nehemiah is saddened. The king asks him why, even though Nehemiah has such an important role. He grants Nehemiah the opportunity to go. What happened? I showed you in the scripture in chapter 2. Nehemiah prayed and God provided. Nehemiah requests, and it is a very sad situation, and it's also a very fearful situation because he needed to go and do inspection, and his life was also endangered. Now, in verse 10, tells us that two men were greatly displeased that he had come.
Verder. Oh, jullie moeder, ja. Kom.
Okay.
Unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know what happened. Something happened, but anyway, let me go on. In verse 10 tells us that two men were greatly displeased and that he had come to seek the welfare of the people. We see that Nehemiah goes into Jerusalem. He tours the situation at night and he does not tell anyone exactly why he is there. Now remember this, he's not being misleading. He went to observe. He went to go and look for himself. Okay? Now, sometimes we as leaders, we just want to take others, what others says to us. We don't verify. We sometimes listen to others and we draw, we sort of draw a conclusion of what others have said. As leaders, we have to be very careful of that. Learn a principle from Nehemiah. He heard, he reacted. We as leaders, we need to listen and we need to react and we need to verify things ourselves. So after his inspection, he gathers everyone. And in verse 17, you will notice it says, Then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste, and how its gates are burnt with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. So he encourages others and he says, let us. He doesn't say, you come and you build. He says, let us come together and let us build. So what does a leader do? A leader leads by example. A leader gets down onto his knees and is the first one to do that. If you want brethren to be early, if Bible study starts at 9 o'clock and you encouraging the church members to be there at 9, then you need to make sure that you're there by 10 to 9. And you don't come at 9 o'clock when everybody else comes. When we say that a class is going to start at 10 o'clock, then we make sure that we are there 10 to 10 beforehand already. And this is something that we will learn from Brother Paul, the students. Brother Paul is a very stickler for time. If he says we are leaving at 9 o'clock, and the students have experienced that. If you come there at 1 minute past 9, Brother Paul is gone. Because he said at 9 o'clock, I'm leaving. You must be there at 9:15. At 9 o'clock, I'm leaving. I remember we had a door knocking in Hopefield. And all the students were supposed to be at the building at 7 o'clock in the morning. He said, be there by 7:15. I'm leaving at 7 o'clock. At 7 o'clock, he started the van and he left. And 3 students came with him. And I think 5 students did not come with because they were late. You see, we need to learn to be on time. First of all, it's not just leaders. It starts with its members, but it starts with the leader as well. And then in verse 18, Nehemiah told him about the good hand of God being on him. And he says, God has answered his prayers. Look at verse 18 again. It was read, but I'd like to read it again. And I told him of the hand of my God, which had been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. And then they set their hand to this good work. You see that? So first of all, who does he give acknowledgement to? He gives acknowledgement to God. I told you of what had happened yesterday. And when I completed everything and I prayed before Sister Ross and I left the home of the couple, in my prayer I said, thank you, God, for giving me the wisdom to be able to discern the situation. Thank you for granting the family an open heart in receiving us into their home to discuss the matter on hand. I didn't say, God, I'm so glad that I could resolve this matter. I'm so glad that I can leave from here now and they are going to be fine. No, I acknowledge the hand of God in it before we pray. We ask God to soften their heart. We ask God to give them an open heart. We ask God to help us in discerning in what we're going to say, how we're going to handle the situation. And God made that provision, and then afterwards I thank God for that. And so this is exactly what Nehemiah does. And he says, let us rise up and let us build. Now, remember this, there were opposition, even in the time of Nehemiah. Everybody wasn't behind him. Everybody wasn't prepared to build. There were opposition. We as leaders, we are going to experience opposition. Everybody's not going to be 100% behind us. Everybody's not going to agree with everything. Okay? But I want you to notice in verse 19 how he deals with it. He says in verse 19, but when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, and Geshem, the Arab, heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? They didn't give the support that Nehemiah was looking for. Those people that were involved could have become discouraged. Nehemiah could have become discouraged. But what did he do? He said, no, the slander that you are giving against me, the slander that you are saying against me, they are not rebelling against me. That was Nehemiah's response. You are rebelling against God. So as leaders, when things don't go our way, when there's people in opposition, all we need to do as leaders is remain focused. We need to remain focused on God and allow God's hand to deal with what is at hand. When there are slanderers, God will deal with them. When there are backbiters, God will deal with them. When there are evil workers, God will deal with them. When there are people opposing us as leaders, God will deal with them. See the hand of God in everything. In verse 20, how will the people respond? Notice this in verse 20. So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. He says, let me deal with it. He didn't say, now you people deal with those who are opposing. As leaders, we take the leadership role. When there's criticism, we deal with it. When there's abuse, we deal with it. When there's things that comes against the group that we are leading, we deal with it. Okay? God gives the success, and this is what we see in verse 20. God gives us success. And so, brethren, as leaders, as future leaders, as we talk about leadership within the church, before there is a reaction or before we act upon anything, remember this, remember, you pray. While Christ was on the cross, when he was arrested, if you read the Gospel, when Christ was arrested, he prayed. While he was on the cross, he prayed. And he taught us how to pray. He taught his disciples how to pray. And so anything that we tackle in the future, let us have a heart of prayer like Nehemiah did. What a tremendous lesson can be taught from Nehemiah as a leader of what leadership ought to be. Okay? And so that is what I needed to present to you this evening with the time allowed. And I hope that I've shared something that has been relevant to you and that will help you, whether you are a leader, whether you become a leader, whether you're going to not become a leader, but support the leader. At least you will know the principles of leadership. Okay, so God bless you. Any questions? Lift up your hand so I can see.
Brother Philip, I just want to thank you for
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to thank you for presenting the class tonight.
Go ahead, Brother Isaac.
Can you hear me, brother? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Brother Philip? I think Brother Philip is...
Is it noticing again? Huh?
I'm not sure. So long, yeah?
Breathe.
People.